In a small Texas town called Pine Hollow, a strange wind began to blow one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The locals had always been used to the dry, dusty winds of the desert, but this was different. This wind carried a cold, unnatural chill, and it howled through the streets like a mournful cry. At first, the people thought it was just another storm rolling in, but this wind didn't feel like any storm they had ever known. It seemed to whisper, beckoning, calling, to them in a language they couldn't understand. People hurried inside, closing doors and windows, but even then, the wind seemed to find its way inside, seeping through the cracks. Some of the older folks remembered stories from their youth, tales of strange winds that carried evil spirits, but they dismissed it as nothing more than superstition. Yet, as the night wore on, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. The wind didn't just blow, it seemed to be alive, twisting and turning with purpose, as if it had a mind of its own. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the air became thick with an oppressive energy. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, without warning, the wind grew even louder, a piercing howl that echoed through the empty streets, sending a shiver down the spine of anyone who dared to listen. As the night wore on, the wind grew stronger, rattling the windows of homes and shaking the branches of the trees. It sounded like it was alive, like it was searching for something. People locked their doors and windows, but no matter how tight they sealed their homes, the wind found its way inside. It slipped through cracks, sneaking into their rooms, leaving a cold, oppressive feeling behind. The air grew thick with an unsettling pressure, and the town felt like it was holding its breath. No one could sleep, for the howling wind kept them awake, its eerie sound filling their minds with dread. Some of the town's residents said they could hear whispers in the wind, strange voices calling their names, but when they looked around, no one was there. It was as if the wind itself had become a living entity, capable of speaking to them, of reaching into their minds. The local children, who were usually fearless, huddled together in fear, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching them. Even the bravest of the town's residents, hardened by years of living in the harsh desert, could not shake the feeling of unease that gripped them. They tried to go about their daily routines, but everything felt off. The town had become a place of silence, broken only by the wind's mournful howl. The once vibrant streets now felt empty, as if the wind had driven away all life. By morning, the wind had not stopped. It had only gotten worse. The townspeople gathered in the center of Pine Hollow, whispering nervously about the strange occurrences. Pets had gone missing, and the crops in the fields were withering at an alarming rate. Some said they had heard whispers in the wind, voices calling their names, but when they looked around, no one was there. The local priest, Father O'Malley, stood at the front of the crowd, his face pale. He had seen something the night before, something that filled him with terror. Father O'Malley had been praying in the church when he felt it. The wind. It wasn't just outside. It was inside the church too, swirling around him, carrying with it a foul, sulphurous smell. As he prayed, the whispers grew louder, and he could hear the wind speaking in a voice that was not human. He tried to ignore it, but the voice was relentless, repeating the same words over and over. "Come closer, Father. Come closer." It was as if the wind itself was trying to draw him in, to pull him into something far darker than he could comprehend. He could feel the presence of something evil, something ancient, just beyond the reach of his sight. The air in the church grew thick, and Father O'Malley's heart raced in fear. He had never felt such a malevolent force before, and it terrified him. In a panic, he fled the church, rushing out into the streets, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of the wind. Now, standing before the townspeople, he was filled with dread. He had seen something that made him believe that the town was no longer safe. Father O'Malley had been praying in the church when he felt it. The wind. It wasn't just outside. It was inside the church too, swirling around him, carrying with it a foul, sulfurous smell. The church, which had always been a place of peace and comfort, felt like a prison, its walls closing in on him. The wind seemed to be alive, moving with purpose, as if it had a mind of its own. As he knelt in prayer, the whispers began. At first they were faint, just a murmur in the distance, but they grew louder until they filled the entire church. The voice was not human. It was something older, something that had existed long before the town was built. "Come closer, Father. Come closer," it repeated over and over again, its voice echoing in his mind. Father O'Malley tried to ignore it, focusing on his prayers, but the voice would not go away. It was as if the wind was speaking directly to him, calling him, urging him to give in. The more he resisted, the stronger the wind became. The church's doors rattled violently, and the windows shook as if they might shatter. The air grew colder, and the smell of sulfur grew stronger, filling his nostrils and making him gag. It was then that he realized the truth. This was no ordinary wind. This was the work of something evil, something ancient and powerful that had come to claim Pine Hollow as its own. Father O'Malley knew he had to leave, but as he turned to run, the wind seemed to follow him, pushing him out of the church, with a force he couldn't explain. He fled into the streets, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with fear. The town was in danger, and he didn't know how to stop it. The townspeople were skeptical at first, thinking Father O'Malley had lost his mind. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. People would wake up to find their livestock mutilated, their homes ransacked, and eerie symbols scrawled on their walls. The wind continued to howl, growing louder each night, and the temperature in Pine Hollow dropped to unnatural lows. No one dared to leave their homes after dark, for fear of what the wind might bring. Those who ventured out during the day spoke of strange shadows moving at the edges of their vision, figures that seemed to vanish when they turned to look. The town, once full of life, now felt like a ghost town, its streets empty and its buildings decaying. The wind, which had once been a mere nuisance, now felt like a constant, oppressive presence, suffocating the town. Some of the older residents began to talk about the legends they had heard as children, stories of a demonic wind that could possess the living, driving them to madness or worse. The more the wind howled, the more the people began to believe these stories. The local sheriff, a man who had seen his fair share of trouble, was at a loss. He had never encountered anything like this before. The usual suspects, drunks, criminals, and the occasional troublemaker, were nowhere to be found. The town had become a shell of its former self, a place where fear reigned, and the wind was the only thing that seemed to have any power. One night, a young girl named Emily decided to confront the wind. She had always been brave, and the fear that gripped the town didn't sit well with her. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, she ventured out into the streets, determined to find the source of the evil wind. As she walked, the wind seemed to follow her, tugging at her clothes and whispering in her ears. It sounded like 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, but when she turned around, there was nothing there. The streetlights flickered as she passed, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and move with the wind. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but she pressed on, determined to find out what was causing the strange occurrences. She had heard the stories, but she didn't believe in ghosts or demons. She thought there had to be a logical explanation for everything. But as she ventured further into the night, the air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder. It was as if the wind was trying to communicate with her, trying to tell her something. She could hear her name being called, but when she looked around, there was no one there. Her heart raced, and her breath came in short gasps. But she didn't stop. She had to know what was happening to her town. The wind seemed to grow stronger with every step she took, pushing against her, trying to force her to turn back. But Emily wouldn't give up. She was determined to uncover the truth. No matter the cost. Emily walked deeper into the woods on the outskirts of town, where the wind seemed to be the strongest. The trees twisted and groaned under its power, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. As she reached the heart of the woods, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There, in the clearing, stood a figure cloaked in darkness. Its face was hidden, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural red light. The wind swirled around it, and Emily could feel the evil radiating from it. The figure didn't move, but it seemed to be watching her, waiting for her to come closer. Emily's legs felt like they were made of stone, and her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to escape, but her feet wouldn't move. The figure's eyes burned into her, and she could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on her like a physical force. She tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but no words came out. The wind howled louder, and the figure began to move, slowly at first, then faster, until it was standing right in front of her. Emily felt a cold hand grip her wrist, and she gasped in shock. The figure leaned in close, its breath hot against her ear, and whispered, "You shouldn't have come." The voice was low and guttural, like the growl of a beast. "This town belongs to me now. It always has." Emily tried to pull away, but the grip on her wrist tightened, and she felt herself being pulled toward the figure. The wind seemed to close in around her, suffocating her, making it impossible to breathe. She screamed, but the wind swallowed her voice, leaving her alone in the dark woods, with the figure and the evil that it brought. The figure didn't speak, but Emily could hear its voice in her mind. "You shouldn't have come," it said, its voice like gravel scraping against stone. "This town belongs to me now. It always has." The wind picked up, howling louder than ever, and Emily felt herself being pulled toward the figure. She tried to resist, but it was as if the wind had a mind of its own, dragging her closer and closer. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she screamed, but no one could hear her. The figure stepped closer, its eyes glowing brighter, and Emily could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on her. She tried to fight back, to break free from its grip, but it was as if her body had stopped responding. The wind was everywhere, swirling around her, pulling her in. She felt her strength fading, her body growing weaker with each passing moment. The figure leaned in, its breath cold against her skin, and whispered, "You are mine now." Emily felt a surge of panic, but she refused to give in. She had to find a way out, to escape before it was too late. But as she struggled, she realized the truth. There was no escape. The wind had already claimed her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The figure's grip tightened, and Emily's vision began to blur. She was being consumed, swallowed by the darkness, by the evil that had taken over Pine Hollow. Just as Emily thought she was going to be consumed by the wind, she remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about the ancient evil that once roamed the land. The wind was no ordinary storm. It was a manifestation of a demonic force, bound to the land centuries ago by a group of powerful shamans. The evil had been sealed away, but now it had been awakened, and it was using the wind to break free. Emily knew she had to stop it before it was too late. With all the strength she could muster, she broke free from the wind's grasp and ran back to the town. The wind howled behind her, chasing her, but she didn't stop. She could feel the evil closing in, but she refused to give up. She had to warn the others, to make them understand what was happening. As she reached the edge of the woods, she stumbled, falling to her knees, gasping for breath. The wind was relentless, pushing against her, but she kept moving. She had to make it back to the town, to Father O'Malley. He was the only one who could help her now. With one final burst of energy, she stood and ran, her legs trembling beneath her. She could hear the whispers of the wind in her ears, but she didn't listen. She had a purpose now. She had to save Pine Hollow. With Emily's warning, Father O'Malley and the townspeople gathered in the center of Pine Hollow, determined to confront the evil that had taken over their town. They knew they had to act quickly, before the demon could claim more lives. Father O'Malley led them in a ritual, an ancient ceremony that had been passed down through generations. The townspeople stood together, their hands raised, chanting words of power that had not been spoken in centuries. The wind howled louder than ever, but the people didn't falter. They knew they had to hold their ground. As they chanted, the wind began to weaken, its power slowly fading. The figure in the woods screamed, its voice filled with rage, but it could not stop the ritual. With one final cry, the wind vanished, and the town was silent once more. Pine Hollow had been saved, but the people knew that they would never forget what had happened. The evil had been banished, but the scars it left behind would haunt them forever. They had faced something beyond their understanding, something ancient and powerful, and they had survived. But deep down, they knew that the wind would always be watching, waiting for the day when it would return.